can spend at least 90 minutes with us. We appreciate that very much. So with that, I will turn the meeting over for your opening remarks, Prime Minister, and I believe we'll try and hold you to 10 minutes, and then we'll go to questions. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ce printemps, les Canadiens ont été plongés dans la plus grande crise de notre génération. Encore aujourd'hui, des gens tombent malades, sont hospitalisés et malheureusement, trop d'entre eux meurent de la COVID-19. Des familles continuent d'être plongées dans le deuil, de perdre leur emploi et de vivre des moments très difficiles et inquiétants. Notre gouvernement devait agir. Notre pays faisait face à un virus contagieux et mortel. Le comportement et les choix de chacun pouvaient protéger ou compromettre la santé de tous. Tous les Canadiens devaient prendre des mesures pour freiner la propagation du virus, mais ça impliquait des sacrifices importants. Les gens devaient pouvoir compter sur leur gouvernement. On ne pouvait pas leur demander de rester chez eux et d'éviter d'aller travailler sans leur donner confiance qu'on allait les aider à payer leur loyer, leur hypothèque ou leur épicerie. On savait que c'était mieux d'agir rapidement et de façon décisive, quitte à faire des erreurs en cours de route. Agir lentement, en essayant d'éviter des erreurs à tout prix, aurait été aussi mauvais que de ne rien faire du tout. Avec la pandémie et une crise économique, le gouvernement devait faire preuve de créativité et de flexibilité. On ne pouvait pas hésiter ou être limité par les façons de faire habituelles. Évidemment, la pandémie n'est pas terminée, mais les gestes posés par notre gouvernement ont aidé à protéger les Canadiens du pire. Tout au long de la crise, les Canadiens ont été extraordinaires. Le Canada reprend ses activités, notre économie se redresse, mais la situation demeure inquiétante puisqu'on voit le début de ce qui pourrait devenir une deuxième vague. Comme la Dr Tam l'a dit plus tôt cette semaine, on doit donc demeurer vigilant. La pandémie présente plusieurs défis pour les étudiants. La ministre Chagger a discuté de ces enjeux et de ce que notre gouvernement fait pour y remédier avec ce comité. Nous avons mis de l'avant un plan de 9 milliards de dollars pour aider les étudiants à traverser cette période difficile. Nous avons notamment imposé un moratoire sur le remboursement des prêts étudiants, augmenté le nombre d'emplois d'été et introduit la prestation d'urgence pour les étudiants qui donne aux jeunes au moins 1 250 $ par mois. La Bourse canadienne pour le bénévolat étudiant faisait aussi partie de ce plan. Lorsqu'on a conçu le programme, on avait 3 objectifs en tête. Premièrement, on voulait encourager les étudiants à s'impliquer dans leur communauté en temps de crise. Deuxièmement, on voulait aider les organismes à but non lucratif à remplir leur mission et à appuyer les Canadiens en difficulté. Et troisièmement, on voulait offrir aux étudiants qui font du bénévolat une compensation financière en guise de reconnaissance pour leur service. From the outset, we knew that time was of the essence. After all, even the best
Chair, I have a
program
point of order,
imaginable.
Mr. Chair. Point of order. Point of order, Mr. Chair.
What's your point of order, Mr. Moritz?
I just want to clarify, as per your ruling on Tuesday, July 28th, when you said if it was politicians, we'd get into the 4 second. I just want you to confirm for this round that there will be strict adherence to the practice of equal time for questions and answers.
I don't think it's I will allow it as a point of order. I will explain that when we start questioning Mr. Morantz, and the answer to it is really yes. But I will explain to the witness why we're under COVID-19 rules, basically. Mr. Prime Minister.
From the outset, we knew that time was of the essence. After all, even the best program imaginable wouldn't make any difference if it couldn't be delivered this summer. So we had to quickly connect the thousands of students who wanted to volunteer with the many community organizations that needed an extra hand because of the pandemic. At first, we'd hoped to use the Canada Service Corps. The Canada Service Corps was created in 2018 to encourage young people to serve and connect them to opportunities in communities across the country. By developing networks, creating partnerships with existing organizations, and offering microgrants, the plan had always been to scale up the program over the coming years to ensure many thousands of young people could serve their communities and their country every year. When the Canada Student Service Grant was initially conceived, I expected that the Canada Service Corps would help deliver the program. The Service Corps is an important and long-standing part of our national youth strategy, and I knew that making it responsible for the CSSG would accelerate its development. Ultimately, however, the public service concluded that delivering the CSSG required a third-party partner external to government, and that We Charity should act as that service provider. I first learned that We Charity was being proposed to deliver the program on May 8th, when the CSSG was to go before full cabinet. Until that date, I had not spoken at all with my staff about We Charity in relation to the CSSG. In fact, as of May 8th, my expectation was still that a supercharged version of the Canada Service Corps would likely deliver the program. From my perspective, We Charity hadn't come up. As you know, by May 8th, the public service had already concluded that We Charity was the best option to deliver this program. They had formally recommended it. The CSSG, including the recommendation that We Charity be used, had already gone through the COVID Committee of Cabinet on May 5th. I was not involved in either of those steps. On May 8th, I received a briefing before the Cabinet meeting and learned for the first time that We Charity had been recommended as a partner and was on the Cabinet agenda. I asked why the plan didn't involve the Canada Service Corps. We were told that the Canada Service Corps wouldn't be able to scale up to deliver the program in time. This was disappointing, but ultimately not surprising to me, given my understanding of the state of the Canada Service Corps' development and other demands facing the public service at the time. Of course, policy staff in my office had been working with the Privy Council office and other departments. They knew that We Charity was under consideration. However, I never spoke with my staff about We Charity or its proposed involvement in administering this program until May 8th. I also never spoke to Craig or Mark Kielburger or anyone at We Charity about the CSSG. I did not speak to either of them at all during this period. As it became apparent to me, my Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, also didn't know until the briefing on May 8th that We Charity was being proposed. So my Chief of Staff and I were finding out about this important part of the proposal only hours before the Cabinet meeting. Even given the rapid pace of work during the crisis, this was not the way things were supposed to go. We learned that there had been tough questions asked about the CSSG proposal and We Charity during the COVID committee a few days earlier. We both felt that we needed more time before this item was presented to Cabinet, time to consider and understand the reasons behind the proposal that We Charity deliver the program. On that issue, we had several questions that we wanted answered, particularly given my specific expertise in youth issues. During the pandemic, government was working very hard and very quickly. We still are. It was not uncommon for me to be briefed on something relatively close in time to the Cabinet meeting. Here, however, given the scale of the program, the questions that have been raised, and my own commitment to youth issues, we needed more time. As well, we both knew that We Charity was known to be connected to people in our government, including myself, as I'd spoken at their events in the past. So we knew that the selection of We Charity would be closely scrutinized. We wanted to make sure that the process and decision were the best possible in the circumstances. So I decided to pull the CSSG proposal from the Cabinet agenda for May 8th so that further work could be done. This wasn't an easy decision. We knew the urgency. By the end of April, many university students had finished their exams. We were already a week into May, but we pulled the item from the agenda so that we could be confident that we were doing the right thing the right way. My primary concern was to make sure that the public service could fully support its recommendation that without a doubt, We Charity was the right and indeed the only partner to deliver the program. I was briefed again on May 21st, and the Public Service told me that they had done the due diligence we'd asked for and that they were confident in the recommendation. In effect, they said that if we wanted this program to happen, it could only be with We Charity. The choice was not between providers. It was between going ahead with We Charity to deliver the program or not going ahead with the program at all. Given the Public Service advice, I was comfortable that the CSSG could now be presented to Cabinet. On May 22nd, Minister Chagger presented the program to Cabinet, and Cabinet approved it. After Cabinet approved the CSSG, the next step was to approve its funding. Here, the briefing note from policy staff in my office recommended imposing an additional oversight measure in the dispersal of the approved funding. I agreed with that recommendation and directed that before additional tranches of funding were released, Minister Chagger would have to write to the President of the Treasury Board to provide an update on the CSSG. When Cabinet approved the CSSG, obviously I knew that I had spoken at various We Charity events. I'd never been paid to do so. I was also aware that my wife had an unpaid role as a We Charity ambassador and ally. I knew she appeared at We Charity events and that when she traveled to get to an event, We Charity covered her related expenses. I also knew that Sophie had recently launched a podcast on mental wellness in conjunction with We Charity. The Ethics Commissioner had approved this role, including We Charity covering her expenses. I also knew that my brother and mother had worked with We Charity as well as with other organizations. However, I did not know how much work either of them had done with We Charity or how much they'd been paid. These were things that I would only learn after the program launched publicly. That said, sometimes recusing oneself can be the right thing to do, even if it's not required. Here, my mother's connection to We Charity and the other connections in my family could lead some people to wonder whether those connections had played some role in the decision to select We Charity. That, of course, was not the case. We Charity received no preferential treatment, not from me, not from anyone else. The Public Service recommended We Charity, and I did absolutely nothing to influence that recommendation. I didn't even know it had been made until May 8th. And when I learned that We Charity was recommended, I pushed back. I wanted to be satisfied that the proposal that We Charity deliver the CSSG had been properly scrutinized. L'organisme uni n'a pas reçu de traitement de faveur, ni de moi, ni de qui que ce soit d'autre. La fonction publique a recommandé l'organisme uni et je n'ai absolument rien fait pour influencer cette recommandation. Je ne savais même pas que la recommandation avait été faite avant le 8 mai. Lorsque j'ai appris qu'on nous recommandait uni, j'avais des questions. Je voulais être certain que la proposition de faire appel à uni pour mettre en œuvre le programme avait été examinée de près. Comme je l'ai dit, j'aurais dû me retirer de cette décision pour éviter toute apparence de favoritisme. Je sais que les apparences peuvent nuire à un bon programme. Et bien sûr, c'est exactement ce qui est arrivé ici et c'est vraiment dommage, surtout parce que c'est un programme qui aurait pu être très important pour les étudiants et pour nos communautés. Pour conclure, ni moi, ni mon personnel avons tenté de dicter ou d'influencer la recommandation émise par la fonction publique concernant l'organisme uni. To conclude, there was never any direction by or attempt to influence from me or my staff that the Public Service recommend We Charity. Getting young people to serve has been a goal of mine well before I ever got into politics, so I deeply regret how this has unfolded. It's now July 30th. Our government is delivering an up to $9 billion aid package for students. Unfortunately, the grant for volunteer service is unlikely to be part of the package this summer, and that is something that I regret. I'm pleased now to take any of your questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Before we go to questions, just for Mr. Morantz's point and also for relevance, I would remind the committee of the original motion As part of its study on COVID-19, we hold hearings to examine how much the government spent in awarding the $912 million sole source contract to We Charity, and how the outsourcing of the Canada Student Service Grant to We Charity proceeded as far as it did. On Mr. Morantz's point, and I think you are aware of this, Mr. Prime Minister, with the way questions work in the House of Commons, I call it the COVID-19 questioning experience, where each member is allocated so much time, and we will stick to the 6 minutes for the first round and 5 for the second today for questions and answers. But the process will be, if it's an 8-second question, we expect the answer to be 8 seconds, and I will try and track that on my iPad here. I may be a little off from time to time. So if we can, from both sides, so there will be no doubt interruptions on the part of the chair to the witness, yourself, Prime Minister, and probably to members as well, to stick to those rules. The first round of questions will be Mr. Poilievre, followed by a splitting of time between Mr. Fragiskatis and Ms. Kotrakis, and then Mr. Fortin and Mr. Angus. Mr. Poilievre, 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Prime Minister. What is the total dollar value of all of the expenses reimbursed, fees paid to, and any other consideration provided by the We Group to you, your mother, your spouse, your brother, and any other member of your family? Just the total, please.
Minister.
Sorry, mute. I don't have that exact figure. Reimbursing expenses is something done by an organization, for example, so I don't have those totals.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
Yeah, what's your point
Mr. Chair,
of order?
sorry, no, Mr. Speaker. My point of order is, what's the relevance of these questions of ancillary fees paid to family members to the official motion that you just
I don't think that is a point of order, Ms. Zerwitz. Back to Mr. Poilievre.
So you're telling me that you don't know how much immediate family members have been paid in expense reimbursements by this organization?
My mother and my brother are professionals in their own right who have engagements and have for many, many years with many different organizations across the country. And I don't have the details of their work experiences or their expenses.
And what about your spouse? What is the dollar figure?
I think We Charity has been able to share those dollar figures with you.
When was the last time she had an expense reimbursed by We Charity?
I believe it would have been for the trip to London where she spoke at We, but those expenses were cleared in advance by the Ethics Commission.
And how much was it?
Mr. Poilievre.
How much were those expenses?
I don't have that number in front of me.
Mr. Prime Minister, it's very hard to believe you don't have that number. You've been embroiled in this scandal now for over a month, and these kinds of questions have been asked repeatedly. I asked it to you in the House of Commons weeks ago. You've had time to get it, so I'll ask again. How much was your spouse reimbursed by We for her recent trip to London?
Okay, to take an example, for a plane ticket that was booked for her flight to London, it wasn't something that she would have paid for to be reimbursed by
what about a hotel?
Charity. The We Charity would have actually paid for that ticket themselves. So we wouldn't have those answers on our credit cards, for example.
So you don't have any idea how much the We Charity paid for your spouse to travel to London?
Over the past number of months, I've been involved in serving Canadians and focused on that. But I know that the We Charity themselves have shared those expenses, and
they have not.
The opportunity to talk to them.
They have not shared those expenses, Prime Minister. They have refused to tell us the itemized expense for that trip, and they didn't even confirm she was on that trip. What hotel did they pay for her to stay at?
I don't know.
Okay. This would have been a very expensive trip, and it would have been paid for in March. Your government then, a month later, was amassing a program of $500 million, which you now admit you helped approve a month after that. How could you possibly have believed that it was appropriate for you to approve a nearly $500 million grant to a group that only 60 days earlier was paying for sumptuous travels for immediate members of your family?
Mr. Prime Minister.
The Ethics Commissioner fully cleared Sophie's volunteer unpaid work with WE, whether it's for her podcast or her appearance at WE events or her work as a WE ambassador and ally. It was all entirely unpaid, but they reimbursed expenses, and that was clearance that was gotten in advance by the Ethics Commissioner.
And did you tell the Ethics Commissioner?
Mr. Poilievre, we're on equal time here, and the Prime Minister still has time. Go ahead, Prime Minister.
Obviously, that was not a concern for me, knowing that the Ethics Commissioner had approved of Sophie volunteering her time and having expenses covered for engagements with this.
And when you became became involved with the decision to approve the $500 million grant to We Charity on May the 5th, did you then immediately inform the Ethics Commissioner that you were doing that, and and also inform the Ethics Commissioner that this group was paying expenses for your spouse?
As I said, the Ethics Commissioner already knew because he had approved Sophie volunteering with the WE organization a long time ago. And secondly, my knowledge of WE being involved in delivering this program only happened on May 8th, not on May 5th, as you are saying.
On May 8th, did you contact the Ethics Commissioner to seek permission to be part of the decision to approve this $500 million grant? Yes or no?
On May 8th, I received the formal recommendation by the Public Service that they go ahead with the WE program, that they go ahead with the WE program to deliver it. And I pulled it back from Cabinet and asked them to do further due diligence because I knew there would be questions asked.
I'm sorry, Prime Minister, back to Mr. Poilievre.
Time remaining?
You have about 68 seconds.
Mr. Prime Minister, you admit now that you should have removed yourself from the decision to grant this $500 million grant to the We Charity. You were found guilty of taking a free vacation from someone who sought a $15 million grant from you, strike one. You were found guilty of interfering with the criminal prosecution of a Liberal Link corporation, strike
Chair,
two.
Point of order.
What's your point of order, Mr. Sabera?
The MP Poilievre has brought up some points that are not of relevance to this committee and the motion put forth.
I am going to allow the question, but Mr. Poilievre, please leave time for the answer in your 6 minutes as well. Go ahead.
Thank you. You were twice found guilty of breaking the Ethics Act before, strikes 1 and 2, and now you admit a third strike by your failure to recuse yourself, and in the process you broke the Ethics Act a third time. What happens in baseball when you have 3 strikes?
That's the end of the your round, Mr. Poilievre. Mr. Prime Minister, you have about 30 seconds to respond.
As I said to Canadians a number of weeks ago, I should have recused myself, knowing the connections between my family and the perceptions around this issue. However, I did not intervene to make this recommendation happen. When the recommendation came forward from the Public Service, I sent it back to the Public Service to say, you really need to make sure that this is indeed the only organization that can deliver this program, and that this is done exactly the right way, because there is going to be careful scrutiny on this. At that point, instead, I should have recused myself, but I didn't. I decided to push back instead, and that I regret, because young people aren't having the opportunities they would have had this summer through that program, even though there's many other things we're doing for young people this summer.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll turn to Mr. Fragiskatis for 4 minutes and Ms. Kotrakis for 2 on a split round. Mr. Fragiskatis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Prime Minister, for being here. First of all, Mr. Prime Minister, is there a personal relationship between you and the Kielburgers? Are you friends? Have you spent social time together? Have you had dinners together or anything like that?
No, I have seen them at events, but not outside of official or public events.
Thank you very much. I do want to ask you, Prime Minister, about the lack of recusal. Some have suggested that perhaps the recusal did not happen because the pandemic is forcing decisions to be made quicker than ever before. And when decisions are made quickly, mistakes are more likely to happen. First of all, to what extent is that a fair observation in your view? And second, if it is a fair observation, COVID-19 will certainly set the context within which policy is made for some time to come. That implies that choices about policy and programs will need to continue to be made very quickly. Are there mechanisms in place at the cabinet level or in other institutions of decision making? Are they in place to prevent a mistake of this kind from happening again?
First of all, thank you for the question. Obviously, yes, during a time of pandemic, things are accelerated. And as I said from the beginning, and as I've said throughout this pandemic and all my press conferences, we've moved quickly to try and get help out to people as fast as we could, as flexibly as we could, and we would fix those mistakes as we went on. So there was an understanding that if we waited until everything was perfect before doing anything, far too many Canadians would suffer, and because of the health emergency, even die. So we needed to act quickly. And that is certainly part of the context, but I don't think it's the whole reason as to why I didn't recuse myself. Youth issues have been something that I've been deeply involved with all my career, and I care deeply about the idea of youth service and seeing young people be able to help in their communities with organizations across the country. So this proposal mattered to me, and I, instead of encouraging it along like some people say because it was somehow connected to my family, I actually slowed it down and pushed back on it to try and make sure that everything was done exactly right, because I knew there would be questions asked because of the links to the family. But in no way was this benefiting my mother or my brother to be creating a grant program for students to volunteer in their communities right across the country.
Mr. Fragis-Gaddis.
Thank you, Chair. A final question before I turn it over to Ms. Koutrakis. Prime Minister, to the point about youth and the Canada Student Service grants, in principle, of course, a great idea, a great vision. I am worried, though, about whether or not the program will come to fruition. I've asked this question to Minister Morneau, to Minister Chagger, to the Clerk of the Privy Council. I know colleagues might accuse me of repeating myself here, but we do have you at committee. I have many constituents anxious to volunteer. I have many not-for-profits and charities in the community of London, Ontario that want that volunteer effort as they try to deal with the challenge that is COVID-19. Will this program go ahead? If not, why not? And the money that was allocated towards it, if the program does not go ahead, where will that money go?
To the Prime Minister, if you can keep it pretty tight, sir.
Okay, of course, quickly. First of all, young people are right now volunteering in their communities across the country. We're seeing young people step up in big ways to help out, to contribute in this time of crisis. What they won't be getting through this program is rewards or recognition for 1,000 hours of work or 4,000 or 5,000 hours of work. That was what we were trying to encourage young people to do, even more volunteering that way. However, at the same time, we continue to look for ways to encourage volunteerism, to encourage young people to get involved. I know that Minister Chagger continues to work very hard on that, and I am hopeful that we will be able to continue to support young people in volunteerism as we're supporting them with both the emergency benefit for students and with lots of jobs for students through the summer jobs program.
Ms. Koutrakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm having technical issues here, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Prime Minister, for accepting to come to our committee this afternoon to clarify some real important issues for all Canadians. Let's remind ourselves the grave and unprecedented crisis that you and our government had to deal with in a real hurry, as you yourself said, to ensure the safety of Canadians and to save our economy. My question to you is, there's been a suggestion that We Charity started to pay your mother in 2016 because of your role as Prime Minister. Can you please speak to your mother's personal experience, her advocacy and commitment to mental health before you were elected as Prime Minister in 2015, and her qualifications as a speaker on this issue? And as a follow-up, because I know I'm short for time, Did you at any time encourage your mother to be involved in the We organization or other charitable causes?
Mr. Prime Minister.
My mother has had a fascinating but challenging life in many ways, and she shared that story in her 2010 autobiography. After that, she started speaking and sharing stories and encouraging different organizations who are working particularly in mental health, but in other areas. As she did that, she realized there is a need and a demand for more destigmatization around mental health issues and better advocacy for it. So she actually wrote another book called Time of My Life that is focused on mental health issues, which she published in 2015. Around publishing that book, which also involved working with doctors and experts around in the field of mental health. She has been empowering people and supporting organizations across the country professionally for a long time since then. With the greater focus on mental health that has come over the past 5 years, it is not a surprise at all that various organizations would turn to her expertise and her involvement, but I never directly or indirectly encouraged her to work for We or any other specific organization.
Okay, we will have to go on to Mr. Fortin. Mr. Fortin, 6 minutes and your mic is muted, sir. There you go.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Premier ministre, est-ce qu'à un moment donné ou un autre, au cours de vos relations avec We Charity au cours des derniers mois, est-ce que vous avez vérifié au registre des lobbyistes pour vous assurer que les gens avec qui le gouvernement faisait affaire étaient bien inscrits au registre des lobbyistes?
D'abord, moi personnellement, je n'ai eu aucune interaction avec des gens de Oui au cours des derniers mois et je m'attends à ce que les ministres qui ont eu des engagements avec différents organismes fassent la job de vérifier par rapport au commissaire des lobbyistes.
OK, je comprends que vous, personnellement, vous n'avez pas vérifié et vous n'avez pas non plus demandé à votre chef de cabinet de le faire.
Ma chef de cabinet n'a pas non plus eu d'interaction avec l'organisme uni.
Mais la question est, est-ce que vous avez demandé de vérifier si les Kilburger ou d'autres membres du CA étaient inscrits au registre?
Mais on n'a pas eu d'interaction, ni moi, ni ma chef de cabinet.
Donc, vous ne lui avez pas demandé de vérifier ça. Vous savez que des gens quand même du cabinet, on sait que M. Morneau et sa famille ont été en voyage avec les Kilburger. Votre famille a eu des liens avec eux. Au-delà de la question de savoir si c'était correct ou pas, qu'ils donnent des conférences et tout ça, il en demeure pas moins qu'il y avait des liens assez étroits entre, faut se le dire, là, entre la famille Trudeau et les gens de We Charity. C'était des liens proches. Mais vous n'avez jamais vérifié au registre des lobbyistes cette question-là? Et jamais demandé à quelqu'un de votre entourage de le faire?
D'abord, M. Fortin, vous parliez de liens proches avec les Kilburger. Je ne suis pas ami avec les Kilburger, je les connais, mais il n'y a pas de lien proche par rapport à ça. Oui, ça fait longtemps que je travaille dans le domaine de la jeunesse, bien avant la politique. Alors, j'ai une connaissance de ce qu'ils ont fait. J'ai participé à leurs événements plusieurs fois au cours de ma vie de Premier ministre et avant. Mais par rapport au commissaire de lobbyiste, vous savez très bien que c'est aux individus et aux entreprises d'engager à ce niveau-là et pas nécessairement la responsabilité du côté politique de faire ces vérifications-là.
À votre avis, vous n'avez pas l'obligation, quand quelqu'un vous approche ou approche un membre de votre cabinet, vous n'avez pas l'obligation de vous assurer qu'ils sont inscrits au registre?
Quand on a une rencontre pour le lobbyiste, pour faire du lobbying, oui, absolument, mais il n'y a pas eu d'occasion où les Kilburger ou quiconque de Oui a eu des engagements de lobbying avec mon gouvernement depuis, peut-être pas jamais, mais certainement pas depuis dans les derniers mois.
Combien de millions de dollars ont été versés à We Charity ou un organisme du réseau Oui depuis votre élection en 2015, M. Trudeau?
Je sais que c'est plusieurs millions de dollars, mais je peux aussi souligner que les gouvernements précédents, conservateurs, des gouvernements des provinces ont aussi eu des engagements et des contrats avec cet organisme qui fait un travail remarquable pour des jeunes à travers le pays.
Moi, je ne fais pas le procès de We Charity. La question que je me pose, c'est est-ce que notre argent est bien géré ou pas? Et vous comprendrez qu'il y a des questions qui nous apparaissent importantes. Mais je reviens au registre des lobbyistes. Je comprends que depuis 2015, depuis votre arrivée en tant que premier ministre, il y a eu des millions. Là, moi, je voyais des chiffres tantôt, 5, 10, on ne sait plus trop, là, mais des millions de dollars ont été versés à We Charity. Et vous saviez, j'imagine, que M. Morneau avait été en voyage avec les gens de Oui il n'y a pas longtemps?
D'abord, par rapport à votre question sur les contributions à We Charity, mon bureau ni moi-même n'avons été impliqués dans aucun de ces ententes avec l'organisme uni. Par rapport à M. Morneau, non, je ne savais pas particulièrement qu'il avait été en voyage avec Oui, mais je savais qu'il y avait une fille qui était impliquée, pas celle qui travaillait pour, mais une autre qui était impliquée avec cet organisme d'une façon ou d'une autre.
Monsieur Trudeau, Monsieur le Premier ministre, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire? Je ne savais pas particulièrement que M. Morneau avait été en voyage. Vous ne le saviez pas ou vous le saviez, mais pas particulièrement? Ça veut dire quoi au juste?
Ça ne me surprend pas parce que je sais à quel point M. Morneau est impliqué dans bien des causes, y compris des causes pour de la jeunesse. Mais non, je ne savais pas qu'il avait pris précisément un voyage avec Oui.
OK. Mais vous saviez donc que sa fille avait travaillé pour Oui?
Non, excusez-moi. Je savais
OK.
qu'une de ses filles avait fait des projets avec Oui. Elle avait écrit d'ailleurs un livre sur l'engagement des femmes que j'avais reçu à un moment donné. Mais je ne savais pas que qu'il y avait une autre fille qui travaillait comme telle pour l'organisme.
Avez-vous demandé à M. Morneau si...
You have a minute left, Mr. Fortin. 1 minute left.
Merci, M. le Président. Monsieur le Premier ministre, avez-vous demandé à M. Morneau, à un moment donné ou à un autre, de s'assurer que les gens de We Charity étaient bien inscrits au registre des lobbyistes?
Puisque je ne savais pas qu'il y avait des interactions avec We Charity par rapport à ce programme lié à la COVID, je n'aurais pas eu occasion ou raison de poser des questions sur le lobbying et les Kielburger.
Avez-vous posé la question à Mme Chagger?
Comme j'ai dit, je ne savais pas que l'organisme We Charity avait été choisi pour livrer ce programme pendant le processus qui se déroulait. Alors, il n'y aurait pas eu une question de demander par rapport au lobbying.
Vous avez annoncé, je crois que c'est le 29 avril, le programme, et tout de suite après, We Charity est arrivé. À un moment donné, les liens, vous savez que We Charity est dans le décor depuis longtemps. Vous n'avez jamais demandé à aucun de vos ministres ou de votre staff de vérifier si We Charity était inscrit au registre des lobbyistes. À personne. À votre connaissance, à vous?
D'abord, ce n'est pas le rôle du premier ministre de demander à tous ses ministres par rapport à du lobbying. On a des gens dans nos bureaux pour s'occuper de ça et je m'attends à ce qu'ils fassent leur job. Deuxièmement, l'implication de We Charity, je ne l'ai su que le 8 mai, une fois que toutes ces décisions et ces recommandations avaient été prises par la fonction publique.
Sorry, Mr. Fortin, we're a little over. We'll turn to Mr. Angus for 6 minutes, who will be followed by Mr. Poilievre and then Mr. McLeod. Mr. Angus.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for joining us today. I agree with you. Canadians are in the worst medical and economic catastrophe in a century. And I think what's very frustrating for me is that we've worked very hard across party lines to reassure Canadians that we are putting their interests first. And yet we're here today because of this, I think, very unnecessary scandal. And it comes down fundamentally to a question of your judgment. I mean, there were numerous red flags with this proposal. It fell apart the second it was announced. But the question that sticks with people is you've been found guilty twice of breaking the Conflict Interest Act, that you seem to have this, you give an impression anyways, that you don't believe that the laws that define what politicians can and cannot do applies to you. And so here we are with a case that was such an obvious conflict of interest because of your connection with the Kielburgers that has derailed so much good work and hurt students. Do you recognize what you've done here and the damage that's been done to all of us trying to reassure Canadians?
Mr. Prime Minister.
First of all, Mr. Angus, through this pandemic that, as you say, has been extraordinarily difficult and impactful on Canadians, we have remained focused on them. We have delivered to over 8 million Canadians the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, a wage subsidy that has kept businesses going, commercial rent assistance, support for seniors, support for students, a $9 billion package, of which, yes, this volunteer program was a part. And it is disappointing that we're not going to be able to give grants for students who are volunteering across the country so far, and we still are working on that, obviously. But at the same time, Mr. Angus, you need to know that we have delivered concretely for Canadians. We also, when I received the information that the We Charity was being chosen, recommended by Public Service to deliver the student grant program, I pushed back, perhaps because of the experience that you highlight that we have had
Prime Minister,
pushbacks in the past.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure that all the I's were dotted, all the T's were crossed, that the Public Service was ready to fully justify that choice of We Charity as the only organization.
We're allowed to go back to Mr. Angus, Prime Minister.
I guess the issue is that for Canadians, the idea that this was the only game in town, that we was the only game in town, I'm sure around your cabinet it probably was. But the fact is that the Kielburger brothers carefully cultivated their relationship with you and your brand. After you became Prime Minister, they put you on the stadium circuit. They hired your family members to the $2.5 million. They hired the finance minister's daughter. They flew him around the world. They even made their staff go to his parties. Do you think that that's not conflict of interest? Is that conflict of interest, yes or no?
Okay, from the very first, Mr. Angus, you were unfortunately misleading people with your proposal. This was not something that we selected. This is not something that Cabinet selected. Cabinet was presented a choice by our professional public service saying, if you want to deliver this summer volunteer program, the summer grant program, it's going to have to be with this through this third-party organization. They didn't give us a choice of 2 or 3 different organizations. So when you say that it was maybe the reality around the Cabinet table, but it wasn't necessarily the reality out there, you're actually impugning the very fine public servants who have
Mr. Trudeau,
extraordinary work across this pandemic on delivering for Canadians. Yes. And if they said there is no other organization that can deliver the scale of grants
back to Mr. Angus, Prime Minister.
Then I believe
Thank you. Well, Mr. Prime Minister, I totally agree with you about the civil service. That's why your decision to privatize this and give it to the Kielburger brothers really concerns me. And what really concerns me is you didn't answer the question about whether or not that you thought that your close family financial relationships and the Morneau family close financial relationships is a conflict of interest. That is why we're here. We're not here because of the civil service. We're here because you don't seem to understand, Mr. Prime Minister, that conflict of interest applies to you. So when you tell us that We Charity was the only game in town, well, they were in your world. But obviously, this deal fell apart, and you need to understand that your conflict of interest has put you here.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Angus, your statement that in my world or in our cabinet, we were the only game in town is simply untrue. It is
That's what you said.
Professional public service that put forward the recommendation that said to us, having done their due diligence, that the only organization with the scale and the capacity to deliver this grant program would be we. Personally, I thought we were going to be able to deliver it through the Canada Service Corps, which I created 2 or 3 years ago and was all about rewarding service and creating opportunities for service for young people. I would have loved to seen it supercharged and accelerated to be able to deliver many thousands of opportunities for young people throughout the country. But that wasn't able to be done. And the public service themselves made the recommendation that we had to go with We Charity. And I was not involved in that
last
recommendation
question,
at all,
Mr. Angus, and it'll have to be a very quick one.
Well, very quickly, Mr. Prime Minister, as the former youth voice, you could have been talking to the Federation of Students when you were telling them that they were not eligible for CERB, when you told them to work for less than the minimum wage, when you pushed this deal with the Kielburger brothers and refused to recuse yourself, and not a dime has gone out the door.
Over
Mr.
to
Prime
you,
Minister.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank
failed
you.
them.
Mr. Angus and the NDP have said this a few times, this idea that volunteering is somehow working for less than the minimum wage. I'd like to remind
That's
Mr.
what the legal
Angus that
people
Mr. Angus, the
volunteering
Prime Minister
is
has the floor.
the heart of this country. And people get out and volunteer not for money, but because they want to make a difference in the world. And if you start calculating every volunteer as working for less than the minimum wage, then you are missing a really important part, Mr. Angus, of the fabric
Student debt.
of Canada. And getting young
Massive
people
student
to
debt.
step up
Okay.
and volunteer is something
Massive
that
We
student
will
this
debt.
country
we will have
needs
to
more of.
end
Thank
that
you.
round there, gentlemen. We are going now to 5-minute rounds, and we'll start with Mr. Polyev, followed by Mr. McLeod. Mr. Polyev, 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, I'll be taking Mr. Polyev's time.
Oh, okay. Who was that yelled there?
MP Barrett, sir.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Mr. Barrett. Yeah, I had Mr. Polyev on my list. I'll not take my talking from your time. You get the floor.
Thank you. Prime Minister, just looking for a number. How many times would one of your ministers need to be found guilty of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act for you to fire them? How many times, sir?
Obviously, our cabinet is formed of extraordinary individuals who serve their country, and I have confidence in their ability to do just that.
How many times would they need to break the act before you would fire them?
Obviously, anytime someone contravenes the Ethics Commissioners Act, we take it very seriously, and we'll look at each situation based on the gravity of the situation.
Okay, well, you claimed in your opening remarks that you had basically no idea what was happening in your government. Who are you holding accountable for this decision?
Mr. Barrett, over the past number of months, as a government and as a Prime Minister, I've been involved in the decisions around CERB, around the wage subsidy, around helping Canadians through this extraordinary time of crisis. We've been involved in working quickly and flexibly with an extraordinarily professional public service to deliver tremendous programs to help Canadians.
We will have to go back to Mr. Barrett,
every
Prime
aspect
Minister.
of many of these programs.
Prime Minister, there was no vetting done of We Charity. There are major concerns with this organization. Who is responsible for the vetting?
The public service would have done their due diligence to ensure which organizations could deliver the program as we had laid it out, and they found that only We Charity had the ability to do that through their due diligence process.
Mr. Barrett.
The organization that you approved, sir, was, you know, you had a massive contract given to a shell company with no experience running a government grant program. That's a problem. Someone should be held accountable. Who are you going to fire?
Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Barrett, the public service, which has delivered extraordinary programs, including with third-party organizations. When we wanted to help out shelters, we went through United Way. When we wanted to help food banks, the public service reached out to Food Banks Canada to make sure that they could get that money out. They have consistently worked with third-party organizations. As part of their decision to do that, they have done full due diligence on that organization's ability to deliver the program. And
Prime Minister,
Cabinet, they were capable of
Prime Minister, Cabinet is responsible for decisions, not the public service. A major mistake was made. Someone in Cabinet should be held accountable. Which minister will you fire? Minister Morneau, Minister Chagger, which minister?
The decision in Cabinet was not as to which organization should deliver the Canada Student Summer Grants. The decision in Cabinet was, should we have a summer grants program or not? That was the binary choice given to us by the public service and the minister, and Cabinet made a decision that creating opportunities for young people to serve across the country.
Do you still think we was a good
worthwhile.
choice? Do you still think we was a good choice to run this program, sir?
we will never know, because they pulled out of that being able to deliver the program, partially because I hadn't recused myself and created complications here, and that's something that I deeply regret, because creating opportunities for young people to serve is something that matters deeply to all Canadians across the country.
Mr. Barrett, I'll not take the time from you, Mr. Barrett, but somebody's got their mic on and some sound is coming through. Okay, Mr. Barrett.
Were you aware that the WE organization had fired its board chair shortly before they were given this contract?
No, I was not.
Were you aware that WE had fired a very large portion of its staff?
No, I was not.
How many times did your family members receive remuneration from this organization since you've been elected as Prime Minister?
As I said, my wife works on an unpaid basis for WE and other organizations, and had it cleared by the Ethics Commissioner in advance for both her engagement, because she's been an advocate and a TV and radio host professionally through her entire career, that her activities with this organization and other organizations for free, with being reimbursed for expenses, was something that was cleared by the Ethics Commissioner when she first wanted to become an advocate around these issues with that organization.
You have a minute left, Mr. Barrett.
So every dollar that your wife received in reimbursement or in payment was cleared in advance by the Commissioner?
As I said, Mr. Barrett, this was unpaid work my wife was doing for a cause that she believes in deeply, talking about destigmatization of mental health, empowerment of young people, particularly girls. This is something that she believed in deeply. And yes, we got approval by the Ethics Commissioner that she could volunteer with this organization and have expenses related to that volunteerism reimbursed.
So I want to go.
Question, keep it tight.
Well, I want to know if the Prime Minister can tell us what due diligence looks like. We have an organization that had no assets. It was a shell corporation. They were in violation of bank covenants, a fired board chair. They were firing employees, and the Government of Canada handed over a $500 million contract for them to administer. What was that due diligence that was done, sir?
The public service ensures that any third-party partner that we work with on delivery of a program is capable of delivering the program. They have a rigorous and strong process to do that, and I have confidence in our public service to be able to do that, particularly because during this time of pandemic, they had demonstrated with many third-party organizations an ability to get help to Canadians in record fashion when people needed it the most.
Thank you both. Turning then to Mr. McLeod, who will be followed by Mr. Poilievre on my list. Mr. McLeod, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Prime Minister for joining us here today. I'm glad that when the question was brought to the Cabinet table to run a summer student program, you said yes, because I think it's very important that we do so. And I think that's something we should continue to try to achieve. This is our 5th meeting on the topic of government spending, WE and the Canada Summer Student Service Grant. Throughout this whole study, my greatest concern is that for the whole month since it was determined that WE was no longer going to administer the program is now in jeopardy. That is one whole month that the youth have missed out on experiences and assistance that the Canada Student Service Grant could have provided. In many parts of the country, including here in the North, I'm the Member of Parliament for Northwest Territories, for those that don't know, and Indigenous communities, many of our youth already face many barriers to opportunities that other parts of the country enjoy. We are remote. We struggle with connectivity. There's a high cost of living. And I need to ask you if the government is going to address the fact that our youth have lost out because of this delay.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. McLeod, for your words, and quite frankly for your advocacy for Northern youth and indeed all youth across the country. I share those concerns, and that's why we move forward with multiple ways to support young people through this pandemic. We looked at a $9 billion package to support young people that includes deferral of student loans, that includes creation of summer jobs and opportunities for them at a time where we know that their regular summer jobs may not exist because of the pandemic. And it also included the Canada Emergency Student Response Benefit that gives $1,250 per month to students who need it. $2,000 a month to students who have dependents. And that was something that we worked out with other parties as well. So there are many, many different things we're doing for young people. This particular program, the Canada Student Service Grant, was created to incentivize and to reward young people who are stepping up in their communities. It was about giving a grant to young people for that service that they were so many of them doing already. What we continue to see, even without this financial reward we would have been able to deliver and the coordination across the country, we see young people in the north and the south, right across the country, stepping up and volunteering in community organizations because they know that this is a historic time in which their actions, their voices, their efforts can shape our country for the better. And again, I am always deeply grateful to young people and their leadership within our country.
Mr. McLeod.
Yeah, thank you for that response. I heard your response to my colleague when he asked about this program earlier, and I'm hoping that I can use this opportunity to encourage the delivery of this program, maybe through the public service instead, and consideration to adjusting the original eligibility period to sometime down the road into October. Or perhaps reprofiling the grant funding into another program to support young Canadians. Is that something Cabinet would be interested in talking about?
Absolutely. We know that we need to do more for young people, and encouraging young people to volunteer and be involved in their communities is a great way, not just of giving them experiences and opportunity, but of actually tangibly helping out seniors, young people, marginalized people, community organizations. These are things that young people, young students stepping up can make a huge difference in. So we're going to continue to look for ways to do it. Like I said, the Canada Student Corps, which was created a few years ago, is exactly about that, about coordinating volunteer organizations to create opportunities for young people across the country. It wasn't able to scale up in a way that allowed the public service to choose it to deliver this CSSG program. But as we continue to look for other ways to deliver the CSSG, I know that the Canada Service Corps, which is internal to government, is something that people are looking at very carefully.
You'll have to split 30 seconds with the Prime Minister, Mr. McLeod.
I just wanted to ask if you could just lay out some of the challenges that the Canada Service Corps program faced that made them unable to deliver the program initially.
Very quickly, Prime Minister.
We were hoping to launch a first pilot project with about 7,000 volunteers this coming September as a way of starting the activities of the Canada Service Corps in a tangible way. That's a far cry from the tens of thousands of volunteers that we would have needed or would have wanted through this program to give grants to in this time of pandemic. It was a scale problem and a program delivery challenge.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Polyev, who will be followed by Ms. Zerowitz. Mr. Polyev, 5 minutes, please.
Yes or no question, Mr. Chair. Prime Minister, you twice were found guilty of breaking the Ethics Act. After those two convictions, did you decide to read the Act?
You got 14 seconds, Prime Minister.
Yes, I have read the Act a number of times.
Are you aware of Section 21?
Yes, since I've read the Act, I'm aware of Section 21.
What does it say?
I can pull it up for you, but if you have it in front of you, you can remind me which
Well, it says a
number
public office holder, of which you are one, shall recuse himself or herself from any discussion, decision, debate, or vote in any matter in which, in respect of which he or she would be in a conflict of interest. Now, what you've admitted today is not just that you were in a conflict of interest, but that you consciously recognized in your May cabinet meeting that such a conflict might exist. That it didn't just slide by your desk, that you were consciously aware that there was an inappropriate link to your family that would put you in a conflict. Why did you, at that moment, not call the ethics commissioner and recuse yourself?
That is simply not true, Mr. Poilievre. The issue of advancing issues for one's own family. And by the way, the ethics commissioner is looking into this right now, and I fully trust his judgment on determining it. But at the same time, my concern around recusing myself was a question around perceptions, because I knew full well that this Canada Summer Students Grant Program was not going to directly benefit my mother or my brother.
Your 16 seconds are up. Your 16 seconds are up. I'm going to ask you again, because nobody believes you when you say you don't know how much money your family has got from the We Group. So you've had a month to look into that. You knew you were going to testify here. Again, how much money total have your brother, mother, and spouse received from this organization? How much?
That information has been publicly shared, but I will highlight.
Well, then tell me what it is.
My mother
How much?
has
just the dollar figure.
Throughout her life.
The dollar figure, Prime Minister.
Various ways, and is proud
How much?
of the work that she's done, and I'm proud of her.
How
as well.
much? I'm looking for a dollar figure.
We can get that number for you if you like. It's been out in the media.
It's been in the media, but you don't know it?
I don't have it in front of me, and quite
you don't
frankly,
know how much your family has received from this organization, which you tried to give $500 million, really?
Can I answer, Mr. Poilievre?
I'm waiting. You haven't done an answer so far. Let's make this the first one.
My mother has worked as an advocate.
The dollar figure, Prime Minister.
Speaker for many good organizations across the country.
Mr.
Many,
Prime Minister,
you are
being asked a direct question at a parliamentary committee.
To support her because she does her own work, and I'm proud of the work that she does. Point of order. But I do not feel that it is my responsibility to peer into the work my mother is doing, because I have
point of order to suspend.
She's doing.
Point of order to suspend.
I've come to learn that the chairperson's power has gone out and is no longer part of this meeting. May I propose that we?
It's okay. We can keep. Prime Minister and I can continue talking.
No.
I
suspected that might be a problem. It's very convenient timing for the lights to go out.
Look, I got a message to the effect that his power has gone out. I have no reason to distrust him.
I hope you don't pull the fire alarm now.
Yeah, well, look, there's no intent in my own private home here in the middle of a pandemic. I don't have a fire alarm.
I propose the general process is that the vice chair assumes the chairing of the meeting. So we'll continue.
And that would be me. So we'll continue the meeting. And I now give the floor to the member for Carleton. Mr. Prime Minister, you have. I'm going to ask you one last time. How much did your family get from this organization? How much?
Have you read the Conflict of Interest Act, Mr.
Yes,
Poilievre?
I have.
How does it define family?
I'm asking you.
How does it define
I'm asking
family?
you how much your family got.
The Conflict of Interest Act defines family as spouse and direct dependents.
Point of order.
So you're not going to answer that question.
Point of order.
So you're not going to answer the question then. So you're not going to answer the question about how much your family received. Okay, you're right.
Hold it, gentlemen. If you.
For working with we, and it was cleared by the ethics commissioner ahead of time.
Okay.
Mr. Poilievre, can I welcome back Wayne Easter? Can I welcome back Wayne Easter, a man we've deeply missed? Come on, Wayne, where have you been? Were you
look,
I had things under control for you while you were gone.
I imagine that, Wayne. Pierre, it wouldn't be the first time you tried to put my lights out, and that's exactly what happened, Pierre. We got a thunderstorm here. Anyway, where will you're well into your 5 minutes, but go with one last question.
Mr. Trudeau, I'm going to conclude by asking you. You claim that you have no knowledge of the amount that has been paid in expenses to your spouse. You correctly pointed out that the Act defines family as including a spouse. Therefore, you know you're under investigation regarding the act. I'm going to ask you again, how much in total, and I'm looking for a dollar figure here, sir, how much did your spouse receive in reimbursed expenses or other benefits from this organization? How much?
Your original question, Mr. Poilievre, was how much was my immediate family?
I asked you a different question now.
For,
how much?
Mr. Poilievre, the Prime Minister has the floor.
My wife has never been paid since I was Prime Minister.
Reimbursed for expenses.
Mr. Poilievre, could we please have order? We'll allow the Prime Minister to answer the question, and then we'll move on to Ms. Zerowitz. Sorry, Julie. Mr. Prime Minister, you have about 30 seconds here.
The Ethics Commissioner has fully cleared my wife to continue her advocacy and her work with We Charity and other organizations.
How much?
In the kind of work that she's been doing all her life.
Just the dollar
figure. She's doing it unpaid for We. She is not being paid by We for her advocacy or for her podcasts. They are simply reimbursing her for expenses.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister and Mr. Poilievre, and I'm sorry for leaving the line. We'll go to Ms. Zerowitz next, and then we'll be followed by Ms. Goodrow, Mary Helen, and then Mr. Angus. So Ms. Zerowitz, 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. You're always calling me Mr.
I know that.
Anyways, Prime Minister, I want to say a huge thanks to you for being here today. I also want to say a heartfelt thanks on behalf of Davenport residents, particularly during the early days of the pandemic. The daily announcements that you made were a lifeline for them, both in terms of information and in terms of the support that we were providing. They really received the feeling that we had their back. And so I want to say a huge thanks to you. The first thing I want to talk about is just about recusing yourself. You had indicated that you felt you should have recused yourself because of the perception. I want to ask a question. If you were to recuse yourself from every decision that might indirectly impact your family, how would that affect your ability to serve as Prime Minister and MP for Papineau?
You're muted. There you go.
Thank you, Chair. I think obviously that is an important question. There are many things I do and we do as a government that impact millions of Canadians across the country. For example, my mother is a long and well-known long-standing advocate for mental health. First commitments we made to Canadians was to invest $5 billion into mental health supports across the provinces. It is possible that I shouldn't have been involved in that decision because my mom is a well-known advocate and works in the mental health universe. Obviously, that would be silly. It is not a conflict, but these kinds of things constantly come up. That's why when the issue of We came forward, my concern was to push back on it, to delay it from going forward to cabinet so that more due diligence could happen. In that case, looking back on it, it would have been better had, for perception's sake, I simply step away and not be involved at all, and perhaps the organization and the program would be delivered right now. But I always look to try and serve Canadians the best possible way, and around youth programs, I have a level of experience on that meant that I felt that I was useful in contributing, and that none of this program was in any way going to benefit any members of my family, and that was something that I was very comfortable with.
Thank you. My next question is, you've made it clear, there were a number of questions around board governance for We and the number of layoffs that had taken place at We Charity. And you'd clearly articulated for Canadians and anyone listening that the due diligence is the responsibility of our civil service. I did want to ask though, Mr. Shugat testified that no one in the public service raised any red flags about the We Charity's financial well-being. So I wanted to just directly ask you, did you see or hear any red flags being raised about the We Charity's finances and the resources? And the second part of my question is, you had asked Minister Chagger to speak with the head of Treasury Board for some additional oversight. So if you could sort of talk to both of those, because I see a bit of a correlation there.
Obviously there are now certain media reporting and questions about the WE organization's financial structures and activities. Those obviously weren't public knowledge and weren't flagged to me at any point during the May 8th conversation or the May 21st or 22nd conversation. In regards to the extra oversight, I recommended we bring in between Minister Chagger and the Treasury Board. That was to lay out the payments to this third-party WE organization for delivering the program in specific tranches that would provide an update before further funds were flowed once they worked through the initial cohorts.
Thank you.
Quick
And then
question, Julie.
Thank you. So Minister Morneau had mentioned to us that over 70 emergency programs were introduced with a spend of over $200 billion. Can you give Canadians an idea about what is your involvement in the big policy decisions that come before Cabinet?
Through the months of April and May specifically, I was working all day on policy briefs and design for the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, for the wage subsidy, for supports for Canadians, for responding to PPE challenges. It was a time of extraordinary activity for the government as the civil service stepped up to deliver things that had never been done before in timeframes that would have been unimaginable. And as a cabinet and as a prime minister, we were tremendously active in this time because we knew that Canadians were counting on us to be there for them as we asked them to do extremely difficult things, to leave their jobs, to stay home, to hunker down so we could defeat this virus or slow this virus. We needed to be there for them, and we were deeply involved in every aspect of how we move forward.
We will have to move on, Prime Minister. I have Ms. Goodrow next, then Mr. Angus.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais laisser mon temps à mon collègue, Monsieur Fortin.
Oh, okay. We're going to Mr. Fortin. Before
Merci.
you start, Rial, for the official opposition, we will have a slot open and then we will end the day. Okay, Mr. Poilievre will be on and we'll end with Mr. Fraser. Mr. Fortin,
Merci,
2.5 minutes.
Monsieur Trudeau, ça n'aurait pas été plus simple, le 29 avril, quand vous avez annoncé le programme, là, ça n'aurait pas été plus simple d'être transparent et de dire aux gens que toutes les relations que votre famille et vous aviez avec We Charity?
Le 29 avril, je ne savais pas que We Charity était impliqué dans ce programme-là.
Vous avez...
Et la décision n'avait pas été prise encore.
Ben, quand vous l'avez annoncé, vous n'avez pas dit que vous aviez des liens avec We.
Non, mais j'ai pas.
Et étonnamment, M. Kilberger, le 22 avril, lui, il semblait dire qu'il y avait eu un appel de votre bureau lui annonçant que c'était fait.
Non, M. Fortin, vous avez pas les dates correctes.
Vous n'avez pas l'impression, en bout de ligne, M. Trudeau, que vous avez trahi la confiance des Québécois, la confiance de l'ensemble des Canadiens en agissant de la sorte?
En agissant de quelle façon?
Vous nous dites que vous vous êtes excusé et que vous avez même reporté la décision de confier le mandat à Oui parce que vous saviez que ça pourrait être scruté attentivement. Vous l'avez reporté. Vous saviez que vous étiez en conflit d'intérêts. Malgré que vous le saviez, vous n'avez jamais demandé à vous retirer de la table de décision. Vous le saviez quand vous avez confié le contrat. Vous le saviez quand vous avez voté à la table du Conseil des ministres. Pourquoi l'avoir fait, M. Trudeau? Les Québécois se sentent trahis, M. Trudeau.
M. Fortin, je n'étais pas en situation de conflit d'intérêts. Je ne suis pas en situation de conflit d'intérêts.
Vous vous excusez pourquoi?
Dans cette situation. Je me suis excusé parce que, à cause de la perception des liens avec ma famille, ça aurait été plus facile et j'aurais dû me retirer pour permettre à ce programme d'avancer. Mais on était dans une pandémie, comme vous savez très bien, M. Fortin.
Mais pourquoi ne pas l'avoir fait au début?
Mr. Fortin.
Dans une pandémie, nous avons livré rapidement des programmes de façon innovatrice, de façon rapide pour aider les gens de différentes situations. Et c'est exactement ce qu'on a fait dans cette situation-là. Comme j'ai dit, quand on a annoncé le programme, je ne savais pas que l'organisme uni en faisait partie.
Monsieur Trudeau, vous avez été blâmé dans le dossier de la GACAN, blâmé dans le dossier de SNC-Lavalin. Vous êtes sous enquête maintenant. Votre ministre des Finances est sous enquête. À quel moment allez-vous enfin prendre la décision de laisser la place et de demander à M. Morneau de quitter son poste de ministre des Finances. C'est vous qui êtes redevable. Vous avez beau nous dire que le due diligence, c'est aux fonctionnaires de le faire. C'est à vous que ça revient, cette responsabilité-là.
Monsieur Fortin, depuis 4-5 mois, nous avons livré, le gouvernement et le ministre des Finances en particulier, de l'aide à des millions et des millions de Canadiens qui ont aidé dans une situation.
Mr. Fortin, your time is up. The floor is the Prime Minister's. If he could finish, please.
Une énorme différence pour les Canadiens et c'est sur ça qu'on reste concentré.
C'est décevant, Monsieur Trudeau.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Fortin. Mr. Angus, 2.5 minutes, and then on to Mr. Poilievre. Mr. Angus.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Prime Minister, 2017, after you're found guilty with the Aga Khan deal, you said, we are going to work with the Office of the Ethics Commissioner in the new year to ensure that as we go forward in full and complete compliance with the rules and the rules in place. You tell us that you held this project back, you did the due diligence, you were aware that there were perceptions that might be problematic. We're not talking about perceptions, we're talking about breaches of the law. In your due diligence, why did you not bother to talk to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner? It is so obvious, Mr. Trudeau, that these conflicts were there. Why did you think it didn't apply to you?
Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Angus, the Public Service came forward with a recommendation to Cabinet to move forward either with this specific third-party provider that was We Charity, or else not move forward with the program at all. That was the binary choice we proposed. I did not influence the Public Service to choose this organization. And indeed, when the Public Service came forward with this organization, I said, you know what? Let's put the brakes on it. Let's make sure that it's done absolutely everything right, because there are going to be questions because of the connections with my family on this. Yes, in hindsight, I should have recused myself, and perhaps that the program would be delivering for students right across the country right now. But I did not. Instead, I put the brakes on it and said, let's make sure that it is doing things the right way so that we don't have any communications or public problems.
Back to Mr. Angus.
I guess with all due respect, instead of continually throwing the civil service under the bus, I'm asking about your judgment, about your legal obligations, because the real losers here are the young people. Statistics Canada says that it's going to take 5 to 7 years for them to recover from the damage. And we had students asking why they were being denied CERB, asking why you were telling them that volunteerism is going to be great, they can work for less than minimum wage. You know, for students who have massive levels of student debt, they don't got $41,000 checks to cover off their losses. They were looking to you as their champion. And I'm really concerned, Mr. Prime Minister, that you think this issue of paying students, university students, a fair wage is somehow an attack on volunteerism. To be the champion of youth isn't to do a high five with Craig Kielburger.
Mr. Angus, your question, please.
Sure, because none of the money got out, not a dime. These students are still waiting. You failed them.
Mr. Prime Minister.
I'm happy to correct Mr. Angus. The Canada Emergency Student Benefit since May 15th has given to 724,000 applicants a total value of $2.1 billion directly for students. That's part of the $9 billion package. The student CERB has made a huge difference. The summer jobs we've created, the deferral of student loans. Yes, I regret that we weren't able to put out
Mr. Angus, the Prime Minister has the floor.
To recognize volunteerism that young people are doing right across the country. That is a piece of it that is disappointing and that I regret and I apologize for. But the ensemble of things that we've done to help students across this country in this historic pandemic has made a real difference in the lives of students and in communities across this country that are seeing young people step up and contribute.
We've had equal time, Prime Minister. We'll have to move on to Mr. Poilievre, and the concluding questions will go to Mr. Fraser. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Poilievre, and please don't shut my lights out this time, will you? Go ahead, Pierre.
Don't shut your own out either. You claimed that the program's purposes were threefold: help youth through the pandemic, help charities get through the pandemic, and help students pay for their post-secondary in the fall. Which of these could the Canada Summer Jobs Program not have done?
Actually, the aim of The three aims that I listed for the CSSG were encourage young people to step up, help out community organizations, and recognize volunteerism and reward volunteerism by students as a way of making a difference in this pandemic.
Back to Mr. Poilievre.
So you can't name a single one of these objectives that could not have been fulfilled by the Canada Summer Jobs Program.
That's not true, Pierre. The third one, recognizing volunteerism, is not done by the Canada Summer Jobs
Recognizing paid volunteerism. So you called it volunteerism so that you could take it outside of the Canada Summer Jobs Program and give it to your friends at WE. My next question: when you directed,
Mr. Poilievre, the Prime Minister's got about 8 seconds to answer that one. Then we'll go to your question.
The CSSG was about recognizing and rewarding volunteerism. It's not about jobs. It was about volunteerism. And that, unfortunately, is something that we can't do because this program...
Back to Mr. Poilievre.
You just misused the word so that you could justify outsourcing a program that already effectively exists within the government. Now, when you did that, you directed $500 million. And yes, you did. You were the head of the cabinet. Did you know that the group to which you were directing that $500 million was in violation of its bank covenant? Yes or no?
That is not something that we had as information at that point.
Did you know that the government money would go into a real estate shell foundation instead of into the WE charity? Yes or no?
The details on the payment were worked out by our professional public service in terms of how the contribution agreement flowed.
So did you know that the chair of the board had resigned? Yes or no?
No.
So you clearly did not do any due diligence of your own. As the chair of the cabinet responsible for approving a decision, you should have had some basic facts. Sir, you were using $500 million of taxpayers' money here. You had a fiduciary responsibility. Why didn't you ask these questions?
We have flowed tens of billions of dollars through the CERB, through the
question isn't about the
benefit, through various ways to help Canadians, and we were very, very active in making sure that flows right. There are many, many different programs, and in cabinet government, we trust the ministers and the public service to do their jobs and make sure that things are delivered in the right way, and in this case, they did.
Monsieur le Président, le temps est venu que le Premier ministre s'arrête de blâmer les fonctionnaires. C'était sa décision.
Mr. Poilievre, just hold on. You're going to have to switch to your French channel because I can't make you out. I'm hearing two languages at once.
Le temps est venu que le Premier ministre arrête de blâmer la fonction publique. C'est lui, un élu, imputable aux Canadiens, qui était le responsable à assurer que l'argent était bien dépensé. Ce n'était pas les fonctionnaires qui l'ont forcé de dépenser près de 2 000 milliards de dollars pour un groupe qui avait payé sa famille près de 2 millions de dollars. Est-ce que le Premier ministre prend la responsabilité personnelle d'avoir approuvé cette énorme somme qu'il a dépensée sur ses amis?
D'abord, je veux mettre quelque chose au clair, que je n'ai que de l'admiration, du respect et des profondes gratitudes pour la fonction publique professionnelle qui a su livrer dans cette pandémie des programmes extraordinaires pour aider des millions de Canadiens. Il y a eu un impact réel sur le travail qu'ils ont fait, qu'ils continuent à faire. Leur excellence a étendu à ces services jeunesse pour livrer des programmes pour les jeunes et j'ai confiance qu'ils ont fait la bonne recommandation de livrer ce programme de la meilleure façon et malheureusement, en partie parce que je ne me suis pas retiré, il y a eu une perception qui a mené à ne pas pouvoir livrer ce programme précis, mais l'ensemble des programmes qu'on a livrés pour les Canadiens.
J'ai une simple question pour vous, Monsieur le Premier ministre. J'ai une simple question.
Mr. Poilievre, you have to split about 40 seconds.
Combien de fois est-ce qu'un ministre dans votre gouvernement aurait besoin de briser la loi sur l'éthique avant d'être congédié? Combien?
Nous prenons très au sérieux chaque fois qu'il y a des enjeux au niveau de l'éthique et nous allons regarder toute situation de façon directe.
Mr. Poilievre, the Prime Minister has the floor and he has the right to answer. Mr. Prime Minister.
We will always take seriously
how many times?
Any breaches of official codes. We will ensure that there are consequences, and we will look at every situation differently.
Fine. In English, I'll ask my last question.
Your last question is over. You're over your 5 minutes. Last night, you people were giving me the gears for not sticking and adhering to time. I'm adhering to time today. Mr. Fraser, you have the last round, 5 minutes, and then the Prime Minister will be released.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Prime Minister. Before I begin, I do want to express my gratitude for your assistance in securing a public inquiry into the mass shootings that took place in my home province of Nova Scotia. It means to the world to us at home. To the matter at hand, you've acknowledged during this meeting and previously that you should have recused yourself from the decision. I appreciate your willingness to admit that. You've also mentioned when it first came up at Cabinet, you pushed back. I've got competing concepts of a need to conduct due diligence and at the same time to have recused yourself. Of course, you remain responsible for the oversight of the policy direction and program implementation of the Government of Canada. And though I believe you were right to say you probably should have recused yourself from that conversation, I have difficulty how you would have simultaneously exercised the kind of oversight that caused you to push back during that May 8th meeting. Had you recused yourself, how would this additional oversight had taken place if you had not been involved in the process of the discussion at the Cabinet table?
That is an excellent question. The quick answer is that other members of Cabinet would have stepped up and ensured proper oversight. But you do highlight one of the challenges of making policy in as condensed a fashion as we have during this pandemic. We have been flowing aid to Canadians, to different groups, filling gaps across the country with innovative partnerships, with creative ways of approaching things, because we needed to be there for Canadians. So yes, things were truncated, things were shortened. Programs that would have taken 6 months to develop and deliver were instead done in the matter of weeks. So it was a particularly challenging situation. And if you'll allow me, Mr. Fraser, let me also say thank you to you and to your fellow Nova Scotia MPs for being so strong in your advocacy to make sure that the answers get given to those families. Your leadership on this has been both personally and professionally appreciated.
Thank you very much. So the process that we've learned to date, that there was a public service recommendation. We learned 2 days ago when the Kielburgers were at committee that the public service actually recommended that they adopt a new foundation, essentially, or at least approved a new foundation to have the flow through money to make sure that the We Charity was willing to accept liability. They said only a third party can do it. I understand, to your point about other members of Cabinet providing that oversight, that it would have gone to Cabinet committee before it came to full Cabinet May, where you still pushed back. So I'm curious, it sounded like your reservation was about the possibility that there might be a perception that your family or people close to you would have directly or indirectly benefited. Were you satisfied when it came back to Cabinet, when this was finally approved, that there was no possibility that your family directly or indirectly was actually going to benefit from the Canada Student Service Grant program?
Yes, there is no way that my family would have benefited from these grants to students across the country.
Okay, thank you, Prime Minister. So back to the matter at hand, I got to say, I was a former youth leader. I took part in different programs, the Canada Summer Jobs Program, student government, and the like. It hugely shaped who I am. I want to build on Mr. McLeod's line of questioning. Where do we go from here? I actually still very much support the values that you outlined behind the Student Service Grant program. I understand there's going to be difficulties over the course of this summer implementing something that would provide that kind of opportunity. What's the next step? How do we actually get this program or some other support on the rails to actually provide the kind of support to students that you have clearly communicated as being important to this government?
And your answer, we'll have to wrap it up, Prime Minister.
First of all, throughout this pandemic, we've had to deliver certain things and suspend other things. Our priority has been on helping people through this pandemic, and that really needed to be our priority, particularly for students, which is why we put out the Student CERB, which is why we've created new jobs, which is why we're deferring student loans. This was an additional way for young people to be involved, to volunteer, to reward volunteerism for young people throughout the country. And it is still a goal of this government. That's why we created the Canada Service Corps a number of years ago. Youth volunteerism actually is one of the things that brought me into politics a dozen years ago, because I was working with Katimovic and realized that we needed to do more youth volunteerism and youth service in this country. So it will continue to be a goal of mine, and something that really is important for the country, to see young people stepping up in their communities, helping out people who need help, discovering the value of service and becoming engaged, active citizens in their communities, in their country for the rest of their lives. This was an opportunity to fit it into a COVID context, but even as COVID continues and even beyond COVID, getting young people to serve in their communities will always remain a goal for this government.
Okay, with that, on behalf of the committee, Prime Minister, I thank you for first appearing before the committee and taking the extra time, the extra 30 minutes to, well, 32 really now, to spend with us today. So thank you again, and we will, Madam Clerk, I expect the Chief of Staff is waiting in the wings. All right, we will suspend for 5 minutes and come back with the Chief of Staff. Thank you, Prime Minister. Meeting suspended.